My goal for this weekend is to try to decide what I want to focus my first round of revision on my novel on. So I am literally just about to start my first round of revision for my mountaineering thriller novel. And I've decided to take each round of revision and focus on a specific aspect each time. And I'm going to do a few things in each revision. And I've set myself the goal of doing between 2 and 4 of these things. And these can be character arcs, these can be setting up foreshadowing for a specific plot twist that's going to happen. It can be building a relationship between two characters. It can be solidifying a theme. This weekend, I'm going to be at a cabin on a lake, basically in the middle of nowhere. We're about almost 7 miles away from the road system, and we have no electricity or anything like that. So we're going to take the weekend pretty easy, eat a lot, drink, sleep, play some games, try some fishing. And through all of that, I'm going to try to decide what I want to tackle first in my revision. I feel like I do have a good idea of what I want to do. Like, I really want to focus on the main character to start, but at the same time, there's a lot of aspects that go into the main character. Like, there's her character arc, there's her perceived weakness. It's not actually a weakness, but it's something that's holding her back that's kind of separate from her internal conflict. There's her relationship with the other characters, because the main set of characters knew each other growing up, so there's a lot of past history there that I really need to sort out, not to mention this climbing competition that they're a part of. And so as soon as I start kind of picking at the threads of this, very quickly I kind of get overwhelmed in all the things I want to do. So I think the first step will be to start writing a list out of all of these aspects that I want to tackle at some point, and then from that list, make my final decisions on what I want to do. Good morning. I spent some time last night writing down different things I want to focus on in revisions. I have 10 different things, but we got some fantastic aurora, which was really nice. There was a bunch of it at 8 p.m. and then again at 10 p.m. So we spent a lot of time huddled in all of our layers outside in the snow, just looking at it all. It was incredible. Writing this list really made me reflect on the fact that I did a really good job of interweaving a lot of the subplots and characters within this story, because each thing that I would be focusing on, each potential character arc relationship, it's all so interconnected that when I start thinking about what it actually means, moments in the story that I would actually be affected by, it's becoming a lot harder to separate out each of these 10 things. I'm tempted to go with my gut and just go with like the main character's arc, the main character's, weakness or perceived weakness, and then maybe one other thing. But the story is pretty solid right now. I did an in-depth chapter by chapter outline, building off of a couple different plotting techniques. The central one, kind of like that's a skeleton of the story, is the main character's arc, their internal conflict, and how that changes throughout the story. And for the most part, I stuck really close to that chapter by chapter outline. I feel really good about what happens on a scene by scene level. I honestly don't see much changing, at least with my edits. What I do see changing is the angle that I take on a specific scene, or at what point the main character feels certain emotions or has certain revelations, because they all happen, the ones that need to happen, but I feel like I can do it in a lot more of an elegant way that's not quite as like hitting the reader on the head with it. This is why I'm struggling, because even though I know I want to focus on the main character and their arc at the beginning for the first round of revisions, is because the last, stretch of chapters, I really underwrote them because I didn't know exactly how I wanted that internal conflict to end. But there is a section of the story that comes just kind of before the climax where I'm resolving a different arc that's going on that's like kind of like a subplot arc, yet it feeds into the main character's big aha moment where they realize their wrongs, da 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 da. What is there now? Ends with the main character coming to whatever realization they've come to. It sets them in motion. But how those, I think it's like 2 or 3 chapters, how those play out will have an effect at the very, very end. So I know this is very vague and very confusing. It's still a little confusing to me. But what I'm trying to say with that is that I do want to fix that section in the first revision too. I would want the first revision to get me to a point where I wouldn't be embarrassed if someone were to read the story. Not necessarily everything exactly how I want it, but at least it flows the way I want it. Everything that happens is what I want to have happen. So that way, when I go back, it can really be about straightening out what's there and not really changing things anymore, if that makes sense. But this is the issue I'm having, is as soon as I'm like, okay, I want to fix that section, that affects a few of the things on my list. And then if I want to care about the main character, there's a few things there that need to also be tackled. So it's quickly getting out of control, much higher than the 2 to 4 aspects that I wanted to tackle in this first revision. So I think what I'm going to do is potentially, I'm going to do maybe the main character with the caveat of also allowing myself to fix that section when I get there. I wanted to maybe do some brainstorming as to exactly what I want to happen in that sequence of chapters before the climax. Hello. My brainstorming session was a little hit or miss. There's just so many different possibilities about what I can do with this section of the story. I'm also doing some ice fishing right now. Look at our hole! Though it's kind of a fail. It took us a really long time to dig the hole. We didn't end up bringing our because it was going to be really heavy, so we ended up using like an axe. After we finally got through, we realized the water depth under this ice, which the ice is like 2.5 feet, but the water depth is like another 4 feet, so it's really shallow. Just digging our rocks for now. We also did a nice walk out. My phone's about to die, so I'm gonna make this quick. But yeah, I'm feeling really stuck. There's a lot of different ways I could go with. How you guys doing? You got a little cold there, but we're back inside. Even though I don't think the fishing's really gonna work out, we are able to use that hole to get some water for our Nalgene's. I struggle a lot with this sort of thing in revision because there's no right answer. So I'm gonna give you a bit more context for this sequence just so you can appreciate a bit more of what I'm struggling with. But basically, there's going to be a part where someone notices something and decides to do a bit of like blackmail. And so they decide to do a bit of blackmail, and then the main character's kind of doing this little side quest hunt to figure out who it is that's blackmailing them. The person who blackmails is not really a big deal. And so what I'm struggling with is who I should make the blackmailer, because that part doesn't really matter except for at the very end when, you know, everyone's kind of helping each other off this mountain and or, you know, not. But at the same time, I don't want to spend too long on this section because it doesn't really matter. Like, being blackmailed, going through all that, facing the repercussions of her actions, the main character, for what she does when she finds this blackmailer, that's all well and good. But at some point I also have to go to the next step because that's not the climax. That's not the important bit in the story. So I really need to get in and get out and just do it. But I have the idea for a really cool kind of plot twist, I guess, in this. And it's like, again, it's not an important plot twist because this isn't the big reveal, but it's kind of like a fun thing that could happen. But it would take more setup for me to pull that off, and I don't know if I want to waste the space in the story on that, the word count on that. Maybe it's better if I go through with the three, I think there's 3 different people who could be the blackmailer, and go through with each of the 3 and see what happens and what kind of the ripple effects will be, and then decide from there. Because again, I really want to know what the sequence is, work on it in the revision. I don't really need to do all the breadcrumbing to lead to the blackmailer in this revision. Like, I can wait till the next one, but it'd be really good to know just what's going on. I'm also keeping my mind open that maybe I'm not even going to figure out in this kind of round, and I'm going to have to rewrite it a few times because in other stories I've had to rewrite these kinds of things a couple times before really feeling good about it. And like, there's no right or wrong answer, but it's what do I think is kind of the most fun, best choice in this case, because it's my story. I get to do what I want. Also, a quick update for anyone who watched the Hot Springs trip we went on. I think that's the Rough Draft Diaries 3. These were all the cards that had fallen out onto the snow, and they're all good as new. We're playing it again. This is now our take 2. The cabin and trip game. Box is still destroyed, but yeah, cards are good. I went back and forth a lot last night, debating it which person I wanted to be the blackmailer, if I wanted to use that plot twist that I'd come up with, and I felt like I kept changing my mind almost by the hour. The issue was I wasn't taking the time to sit down and write it out. I find that when you start writing, things just flow and make a lot more sense than when you're trying to hold it all up in your head. So of course, when I finally sat down and wrote out my thoughts, the answer came to me pretty quickly because I really wanted to use my little plot twist, but it's one little idea and I was letting it completely shift everything I wanted to do. And that compounded with the fact that I usually don't give enough credit to first draft me. In the past, a lot of my first drafts have been pretty rough, and I think it's only been this draft and the draft before this where I've actually felt like I could see a glimpse of what I wanted it to look like at the end in my first draft. And because I was telling myself that this section was no good, I had the instinct from all these other times to want to completely scrap it. And then when I sat down and actually started writing out what each of those moments would be in that sequence that I wrote, how I could strengthen them, it did feel like a really good sequence of events. It did feel really strong. I'm not able to use this little gimmicky plot twist, but literally at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal, especially because when I started to go through what it would look like if I wanted to use that plot twist, suddenly there were so many things that I would have to almost MacGyver my way through to make it fit with what I need to have happen for the main character story arc, for events that happen post this climax confrontation that's going on. It just felt like I would have to make too many coincidences happen, you know? that it just started to feel, not that this story is realistic in any way, but it started to feel less probable that it would happen that way, even in an alternate universe where someone's actually enacting a revenge plot against other people in this manner. So I took a really roundabout way to decide that I wanted to make my sequence here exactly what it was to start, obviously working on it and smoothing it out and really building up some of the relationships earlier to make it hit harder for what it is now. And I thought I'd also mention the little plot twist I had because it's honestly not that big, but I just thought it was really fun. Basically, I'm trying to take advantage of the setting and everything I'm building up as much as I can throughout the story. So, when the main character is able to get their revenge on one of the specific characters, it's kind of outside the camps. They're up on the mountain at this point, outside the camps, and when the main character goes back toward the camps, she sees footprints in the snow of someone that, oh my god, it's so windy outside. But she saw footsteps in the snow of someone who had been watching. And I don't know if maybe I'll have a hint of like a silhouette moving in the distance. But the main character knows someone saw what she did. And they're able to see she's able to see the footprints in the snow. Different shoes have different tracks on them. So able to use the footprint to figure out who then was the one to see. And of course, in the case of my story, there's going to be multiple people with the same type of shoe in the sense that their footprint would look the same. But I have these two characters on one of the teams where they kind of have a little bit of a relationship. They're not like a full couple. I thought it would be really funny if the girl used her partner's boots to go out to the bathroom, maybe because they're bigger, easier to slip on, whatever. And so even though they weren't her shoes, she was still the one to see it. I just thought it was like a fun little twist. But then I'd have to implement the main character having to figure that out, and I also need something else to be triggered that, anyways, it just got really, really complicated. So I'm happy with sticking with what I have so far. All in all, I'm feeling really solid about going into this revision. I will not have to make that many changes to the sequence, but in a later revision, I really want to work up the build up to it. And then as well, I'll have to figure out how it plays out more later because I didn't fully commit to that sequence happening because I wasn't sure. So later on, I kind of skirted around it and didn't really address it as thoroughly as I should have. But I don't know if I'll really go into that in this revision. This revision will be all about the main character. So draft 2 will be main character's arc, so their internal conflict, how is that changing? Throughout, how are they dealing with that throughout the story? How are they trying to potentially avoid it and then overcome it, whatever, as well as dealing with her perceived weakness because there's something that's holding her back, not really playing into her internal conflict, but really just giving her another source of conflict, which is why I want to keep the two a bit more separate. And then I'm also going to give myself the third point of how does the environment affect the main character, because I don't think I delve deep enough into how the setting influences her and like in descriptions and also in little bits of feeling, like how cold is it really, how arduous are the climbs really, like really trying to expand on the descriptions I have there to really evoke what it actually feels like to be in those situations. So those are the three things. Main character's internal conflict, main character's perceived weakness, and how the environment is affecting the main character. If you've made it this far, thanks for joining me on this fun cabin weekend trip. And I'll check back in once I started draft 2 and officially started revising my book. So I'll leave you here where it's warm and I'll make the 6-mile trek out to the car where hopefully it'll start.